Before we start this video, I'd like to preface it with a content warning. This video will involve topics surrounding mental illness and can be triggering to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. If you have been enjoying my videos, please like, share, subscribe, or comment to help appease the algorithm. The Babadook is a horror film written and directed by Jennifer Kent. The film was initially released in Australia, but it generated more interest and acclaim overseas, cementing itself as a horror film classic. This movie is one of my favorite horror movies and has a special place in my heart since I saw the movie in 2018. I saw this movie at a very vulnerable period in my life, and in my opinion, it's one of the most accurate visual depictions of mental illness that I've ever seen in film. By that, I want to clarify that I believe that this movie's visual representations, symbology, and other depictions of the Babadook is a very good translation for how someone with mental illness perceives that illness. I think I was stunned into silence after I saw the movie, because it had mirrored my own struggles so vividly in a way that conveyed so much of my own pain and reflection in the main character, Amelia Vaneek. For this analysis, I will be breaking down the movie, but will be interpreting it in a way that is based off of my own mental illness struggles with chronic depression and severe anxiety. The Babadook is a film about Amelia, a widow struggling with the grief of losing her husband, while trying to juggle the demands of being a single mother to an erratic son named Samuel. The movie starts with a disorienting dream sequence. Amelia is reliving her worst memory. She's in a car with her husband, when suddenly they are struck by an incoming vehicle. She's thrashed around in the car, and she's woken up by her son, Samuel, who tells her that he has had a bad dream. She proceeds to check under his bed and in the closet, looking for his monster, but finds nothing. She reads him a bedtime story to put him at ease, and he asks if they killed the big bad wolf in the story, to which she assures him that they must have. He then asks her to read the story again, to which she complies. As he falls asleep in her bed, his constant twitching and grinding of his teeth keeps her awake. He also has a hand around her neck as he sleeps, visually depicting how she feels, as if her son is choking her with his neediness. She scoots away from him and tries to fall asleep. Again, this is visually showing her pulling away from her son as to find relief. In the morning, she is once again woken up by her son, wildly running amok around the house. Amelia is exasperated with her rambunctious son, and she appears exhausted with his antics and obsession with killing this imaginary monster. She gets him ready for his magical performance at school, and he tries to cheer her up by performing one of his magics. He pulls out some flowers from his sleeve and gives it to her. He caresses her and hugs her. The hug is tender, and for a moment they seem to both enjoy it. But Amelia suddenly pulls away and scolds him for hugging her, hurting Samuel's feelings. Amelia is literally pushing Samuel away from her, trying to create distance between the two of them. She is unable to truly love him or give him the attention and affection that he so needs. With Sam at school, Amelia then goes off to work as a nurse. She cares for the elderly, who, like Samuel, can be difficult at times. During the middle of the shift, she is called by the school for a meeting regarding Samuel's behavior. He has apparently smuggled some weapons into school and wanted to go after and kill his monster. The principal and his teacher want to separate Samuel from the other children and appoint him a monitor. This distresses Amelia, who chastises the educators that her son is not a problem. He is a person and should be treated as such. She takes Samuel out of school and decides to look for a new place of education for him. Amelia then takes Samuel to meet her sister and niece at the playground. The children usually have a shared birthday, but the niece no longer wants to share her day with Samuel because it is technically not his birthday, but hers. The reason, seemingly, is an avoidant behavior from Amelia's part, who does not want to celebrate Samuel's birthday on the actual day because that is the day her husband was killed. They were in a car accident while trying to get to the hospital. As Amelia went into labor, their car was hit and her husband killed. Amelia dreads the day and goes through lengths to avoid dealing with reminders of her husband's death. While Amelia talks to her sister, Samuel climbs to stand on top of the swings, alarming the two women. Amelia takes Samuel home as he loudly cries in the back seat. A dejected Amelia drives with a hollow stare at the road ahead. Once home, her kindly neighbor remarks about how Amelia and Samuel look tired. Amelia insists on taking out the trash for her, and the old woman insists that she should just go in and rest. But Amelia proceeds to take out the trash for the old lady, despite her own exhaustion, hinting at Amelia's personality as a caretaker. Her whole life seems to revolve around caring for others, and the burden of these responsibilities is crushing her. Yet she may be using this as a way to think about others so that she may not have to think about her own issues, neglecting her own health and happiness, and even pain. Amelia is shown rubbing her jaw, looking like it is agitating her. Yet she never seeks help and remains in discomfort. This is something that I did myself when I was suffering with my own mental health crisis, trying to ignore my own needs and distract myself with constant distractions so I didn't really have to think about why I was feeling anxious or depressed. Signs of trouble begin when Amelia finds the family dog pawing at the locked basement. While seemingly insignificant, this is the start of the horrors to come. At dinner, mother and son sit on opposite ends of the table, quietly eating, once again hinting at the great distance between them. They continue their nightly routine as Amelia once again checks for monsters under Samuel's bed. He also brings her a book to read for bedtime. Except this time, the book is one that Amelia does not recognize. It is titled Mr. Babadook. She asks Samuel where he found the book, to which he nonchalantly tells her that he found it on the shelf with the rest of his other books. She is confused but shrugs it off and begins to read. The book begins innocently enough, and it seems innocuous. But as the story of the Babadook continues, the book will get more and more eerie. The book reads, quote, "If it's in a word, if it's in a look, you can't get rid of the Babadook. If you're a really clever one and you know what it is to see, you can make friends with a special one, a friend of you and me." A rumbling sound, then 3 sharp knocks. Ba, ba, ba. Dook, dook, dook. This seems to perturb Amelia, and she suggests that the two of them read another book, but Samuel insists. He has become curious with the Babadook and wants to finish their story. But this is when the book becomes more and more disturbing, with terrifying illustrations. This is what he wears on top. He's funny, don't you think? See him in your room at night, and you won't sleep a wink. I'll soon take off my funny disguise. Take heed of what you read, and once you see what's underneath, you're going to wish you were dead. This results with a terrified Samuel, who is now crying into his mother's side. Amelia tries her best to console Samuel with another book, but the damage is already done. Once Samuel actually does manage to fall asleep, curiosity about the book of Mr. Babadook takes a hold of Amelia, and she wants to investigate the book alone. Curiously, the rest of the book pages remain blank, a foreshadow of horrors still to be written. She hides the book on top of the closet, but is now wide awake. Unable to return to sleep, she tries to relax with their family dog in the living room. She snacks in discomfort, once again rubbing her jaw. Salacious ads and old romance movies come onto the screen, which seems to prompt an agonized response from Amelia, hinting at her despair and loneliness after losing her husband. She tries to relieve herself sexually with a personal toy, but is interrupted by Samuel, who is still upset with the Mr. Babadook story. Unable to relieve herself, Amelia remains frustrated and grows bitter. She's finally able to fall asleep, but it blows by quickly, and to her it only seemed like a matter of seconds. Still exhausted, the next day, she wakes up to find Samuel, who informs the teller that they're already late. It's 9 a.m. She lies at work, telling them that she was caring for a sick Samuel and will arrive shortly. Before dropping off Samuel at her sister's, she does tell him not to tell her sister Claire about anything that happened at school or about Mr. Babadook. I think this is a very common masking behavior that I can relate to, trying to pretend that things are okay, and that if you can make it through one more day, things might get better. I never really talked about my issues, even though I suffered from very major depression and debilitating anxieties since childhood. I felt like if I could get through each day, then maybe things would get better. And I definitely did not want to bring attention to myself, so I just wanted to get by day to day. Back at work, Amelia's co-workers offers to cover for her so she can go home to take care of Samuel. She is extremely thankful for her co-workers' kindness, and there seems to be maybe a hint of romance and relationship between the two of them. She takes time to really enjoy the rare moment where she is alone and begins to decompress. She sees a young couple getting intimate in a car, and once again her sexual frustration and loneliness boils to the surface. When she goes to pick up Samuel, she finds a chaotic scene. Her sister Claire is furious at Samuel for scaring her daughter with the stories of the Babadook. Amelia's frustration with Samuel grows, but he remains defiant and acts out, adding to her resentment. He insists that the Babadook is real and that the monster will come get them, saying that the Babadook wants to scare Amelia first. As she prepares dinner, Samuel has snuck into the basement to play with his father's things. When Amelia finds out, she becomes extremely upset with him, and she becomes possessive of her late husband's things, prizing it and keeping it locked safely away in the basement for herself. She holds a picture of the two of them close to her heart, and as she begins to walk away, she's startled by his clothing hung on the wall. This eerie silhouette creates an illusion that someone is there with her, lurking in the basement. At dinner time, Amelia finds glass in her soup. She's alarmed and checks Samuel's soup, only to find it clear. He tells her that the Babadook had done it, and she becomes very agitated with him, dismissing him to go watch his DVDs. Symbolically, I think this is interesting. The glass in the soup, I believe, might represent dangers hidden behind everything, even seemingly things as innocuous as a bowl of soup, or her own son Samuel. This adds to Amelia's mistrust of her own son, who is trying to warn her about the Babadook. The Babadook is further distancing her and her son, causing feelings of hostility and resentment to further rise. Instead of going to get the DVDs and watch his DVDs, Samuel, however, goes to the bedroom. There she finds the picture of her husband and her together has been defaced. She angrily confronts him, and he goes to grab his catapult. They struggle, and Amelia is able to take the weapon from him. But he stuns her by pushing her aside as he takes his weapon back. He angrily screams at her, asking if she wanted to die. This stuns Amelia for a moment, and he takes the opportunity to grab the catapult and run from the room to confront the Babadook. Not knowing what to do, Amelia goes downstairs, continuing to rub her jaw in agitation and pain. She's startled when she hears Samuel scream, running up to find him in a state of shock, screaming at her, saying, "Don't let him in." Amelia, in frustration and terror, rips up the Mr. Babadook book and throws it in the garbage. Samuel becomes intensely frightened of the Babadook, becoming even more clingy to Amelia. Amelia and Samuel do end up going to Samuel's cousin's birthday party, but this year he is even more clingy and strange. His behavior alienates Amelia from her own sister and the other mothers in attendance. While the other women do seem well-meaning, they are incredibly awkward and unintentionally upsets Amelia. Their inane chatter annoys her to the point where she lashes out at them, and things become even more strained. Claire, now upset with Amelia and Samuel for ruining her daughter's birthday party, is unsympathetic, telling her simply to move on from her husband's death, which is completely unhelpful. Meanwhile, Samuel is being bullied by his cousin, who teases him about his dead father. Samuel, in retaliation, pushes her out of the small tree house, injuring her. Amelia and Samuel leave the disastrous birthday party, with Samuel acting completely belligerent, driving Amelia to her breaking point. She stops the car to scream at him, but Samuel screams, "Get out!" and begins to go into what appears to be a seizure. Alarmed, Amelia tries to help him and asks passerbys for help. At the doctor, Amelia is distraught, not knowing what to do. The doctors run tests and recommends that Samuel sees a psychiatrist for his abnormal behavior. However, it will take some time before he can get an appointment, so Amelia asks for medication in desperation to help him sleep. The doctor is hesitant, but agrees to a prescription, seeing how Amelia is struggling to keep things together. At bedtime, Samuel asks his mother if he is weird. He tells her the other kids call him strange and make fun of him. Amelia tries to reassure him, telling him that that isn't true. Amelia is able to coax Samuel into taking the sleeping pills, and Samuel hugs her, saying that he doesn't want her to die. It is clear that Samuel is fearful of losing his mother, like he did his father. He is acting out due to having to deal with such a difficult topic at such a young age. Amelia tries to comfort him, telling him that she will not die for a very long time. But Samuel asks her if that is what she thought when his own father died. This is a very sore subject for Amelia, and she tries to brush off the comment, but it is obvious that she can't really bring herself to talk about this topic. She tells him to take his pills, and he asks if it will make the Babadook go away. She tells him that she believes it will, but that he must never mention the Babadook again. Samuel is unsure and makes her exchange a promise to protect each other. And if they do, he will never talk about the Babadook again. She promises, and he takes his pills. She watches him in relief and stays with him until he falls asleep. An exhausted Amelia walks to her bedroom, and since the beginning of the movie, she seems to have a peaceful, dreamless night. The next day, she wakes, looking restful and refreshed. She goes to find that Samuel is still asleep in his room. In my own experience with my mental illness, especially when I was a teenager, I would often find reliefs and breaks from bouts of depression. After days or sometimes weeks of severe depression and anxiety, some random days I would wake up feeling like myself again, especially after having a really nice long rest. It was very euphoric, and I would feel like I could do anything. But, of course, this doesn't last very long. There's a knock on her front door, and Amelia goes to open it to check, but she finds no one there. She closes the door again, only for it to knock instantly. This time, she finds the ripped-up Babadook book had been magically put back together and placed at her doorstep. And not only that, the missing blank pages appear to have been filled in. The story now taking an even darker tone. The story reads, quote, "I will wager with you. I will make you a bet. The more you deny, the stronger I get." This is accompanied by a horrifying illustration of Mr. Babadook screaming at what looks like Amelia, telling her to let me in. "You start to change when I get in. The Babadook growing right under your skin." This has an image of Amelia seemingly now possessed by the Babadook. "Oh, come on, come see what's underneath." The next page has an illustration of Amelia snapping her dog's neck. It then changes to where Amelia strangles a small figure, seemingly depicting Samuel. The final page ends with Amelia slitting her own throat. Amelia has had enough of the book, so she decides to burn it, lighting it ablaze in the barbecue. Samuel watches on solemnly, and Amelia tries to put on a brave face. Again, this is Amelia trying to cover up the problem, hoping she can destroy it herself. Something I relate to. I often try to deal with my own problems, but of course these are futile efforts that are beyond my own control. And the Babadook is simply beyond Amelia's own control as well. On a phone call with her sister Claire, Amelia tries to reach out to Claire, telling her that somebody has been terrorizing her and Samuel. But Claire is still upset with her and ultimately is unsympathetic, brushing her off and hanging up on her. The phone suddenly rings again, and Amelia picks up, hoping that it was Claire, but it is the Babadook taunting her with his signature growl. Babadook, dook, dook. Alarmed, Amelia goes to the police station for help, but they seem to dismiss her concerns, treating her as a hysterical woman. When they ask for the book, she tells them that she had burnt it, to which the officers are incredulous and becomes even more skeptical of her story. Amelia sees a silhouette made up of a coat and hat hanging on the wall, similar to the time she saw the same silhouette in her basement. She's reminded of the Babadook, and the officer's stare turns more suspicious when he sees her soot-covered hands. Amelia becomes frightful of the stares and runaways in fear. When she goes to pick up Samuel from the elderly neighbor, Mrs. Roach, Samuel blurts out that Mrs. Roach shakes because she has Parkinson's disease. This greatly annoys Amelia, who scolds him for blurting things out without thinking. Mrs. Roach, however, doesn't seem to mind, telling her that he was curious about it, so they talked about her disease. Mrs. Roach comments on how much Samuel is so much like his father, which sets Amelia off, who becomes very agitated with her for bringing up her dead husband. This was a huge fear of mine, to be seen as somebody who was hysterical or crazy. I would do a lot of masking behavior in my own experience, avoiding situations where others might look and notice anything wrong. Like Amelia, I also had a ton of triggers. Amelia's triggers revolves around her husband, sex, and Samuel, and the Babadook. Mrs. Roach's openness to talk about her own disease with a curious Samuel is the healthy and right approach to deal with said issues. Sadly, Amelia is unable to cope and chooses to avoid the topic altogether. This is something I did quite often, and for about a decade I refused to talk about my struggles with mental illness, letting it fester to the point where I could no longer function day to day. This is visually hinted at when Amelia and Samuel return to their home. As Amelia is in the kitchen, she's startled by a roach on her shoulder. Looking around, she finds a hole behind the refrigerator. It is infested with cockroaches pouring out of the hole. Amelia is frantic and cleans the kitchen. I believe the cockroaches here represent how Amelia is very deeply ill, and that there is something festering within her, like cockroaches festering inside the house. The very core of her has something dwelling within her that she must deal with. Amelia's cleaning is interrupted by two people from the Department of Children's Services. They are here to check up on Samuel. The checkup does not go well, with Amelia acting a bit frantic, and a drowsy Samuel who informs them that he is sleepy due to the drugs that his mother gave him. At bedtime, Samuel is completely asleep due to the pills, but Amelia begins to hear scraping sounds outside her door. The door opens, and a figure of the Babadook enters. She hides in fear under her sheets, but the Babadook croaks his signature Ba-ba-dook-dook sound, seemingly from somewhere close by. Amelia dares a peek, but she sees the unsettling figure of the Babadook climbing on her ceiling. It lunges at her and enters her body through her mouth. In a panic, Amelia grabs her son and runs downstairs to the living room. While Samuel is asleep, Amelia tries to stay awake, sitting in the living room. All the lights are turned on, and she watches an old movie. A strange, old-timey, dreamlike movie sequence begin, starring the titular Mr. Babadook. Amelia falls into a dreamlike trance as she watches the movie, and the night seems to pass by quickly. She is exhausted and calls out for work. She collapses onto the bed, hoping for some relief the next morning. When Samuel enters her bedroom, asking for food, she angrily snaps at him in a way that she's never done before. Samuel is terrified and goes to hide in his bedroom. She later comes to apologize to him, but he is still terrified of her. To make him feel better, she takes him to get some ice cream. This is, of course, Amelia starting to spiral due to the effects of the Babadook. This is something that I've experienced. I've avoided sleep because the dark was a trigger for me. It was when I was most vulnerable to a lot of panic attacks, so I would try to stay awake as long as possible. This is, of course, futile because I would eventually fall asleep, only to wake feeling groggy and disoriented. My mood swings were becoming erratic because I wasn't getting proper sleep, and I was on edge because of the stress due to my illness. I developed a short temper, especially when I could not be left alone, and most of the time I wanted to just self-isolate, getting very agitated and irritated when people tried to get me to go do things with them. During the car ride, once again, the cockroaches appears all over the car, distracting Amelia. The Babadook also appears, scaring Amelia and Samuel, causing a car accident. Amelia is stunned, and as the man in the other car is yelling at her, she blankly drives off. Once home, a blank-faced Amelia leads Samuel into the house, as a worried Mrs. Roach can only watch in concern. Amelia's behavior continues to deteriorate further, and she goes into the bathtub to fill it up with water. She enters it with her clothes still on, and a concerned Samuel enters the bathroom to check up on her. She simply picks him up and puts him in the bath, commenting on how warm it is. This is the calm before the storm, as things will begin to get more and more violent and more chaotic throughout the night. Samuel grows more and more concerned, watching over his mother. Amelia goes to the basement to grab her husband's violin. She hugs it as she sleeps. When Samuel gets too close to the violin, she turns aggressive, scaring him. Waking up some time later, Amelia goes downstairs to find Samuel on the phone, making a call to Mrs. Roach. He's asking her if they can stay with her for the night. Amelia becomes very, very aggressive. She is able to dismiss Mrs. Roach's concerns by pretending that things were okay at home, and that Samuel was just misbehaving again. Once off the phone, she turns her hostility towards Samuel, threatening him with a knife. She cuts the phone line, and Samuel warns her that she had let the Babadook in, to which Amelia goes berserk, telling him that the Babadook was not real and that it was one of his little fantasies. She ominously tells him that nothing is coming in and locks the doors and windows, trapping them both in the house. Amelia is exhibiting very hostile denial behavior, denying help and lashing out at those who are very close to her and those who are most vulnerable. She has no output for her rage and frustrations, so she is now taking it all out on Samuel, who is completely dependent on her. She is able to convincingly lie to the outside world, but in the house, Amelia lets all her rage, grief, frustrations, and aggressions out. During bedtime, Amelia makes Samuel take his pills. But Samuel, who is interested in learning about his illusionary magic, uses his know-how and is able to pretend to take his pills using his sleight of hand. Amelia continues to stay up, refusing to sleep. Once again, sitting in front of the television, she begins to hallucinate, seeing a dead body. It is of Samuel covered in blood, with her holding a knife in hand. Amelia begins to completely lose grip on reality, with the dream world and the real world blurring into one. Bugsy, the family dog, grows very concerned with her and senses something is wrong. He chooses to keep his distance, which hurts Amelia's feelings, as she is unable to find relief anywhere. As she sits in front of the television, she falls into another nightmarish state. She sees a news segment of a woman who fatally stabbed her son, only to be shot by the police herself. In a close-up shot, Amelia is visibly seen smiling eerily out a window, staring into the camera. She is startled by Samuel, who tells her to wake up. His eyes are closed, and she comments that he's the one who is asleep. But he only turns away and walks into the usually locked basement. She goes to follow him down and miraculously finds her late husband, standing in the basement waiting for her. They embrace, and Amelia is ecstatic and relieved, but it is very short-lived, because her husband tells her that they could be together again if she brings him the boy. Amelia is wary of him, and he repeats his demand, refusing to call Samuel by his name. This frightens Amelia, and she runs away upstairs. She is then hunted by the Babadook. She feels him stalking her, and as she tries to run away, she is overcome by fear. She tries to dismiss him, telling herself that the Babadook is not real, but the Babadook overcomes her and latches into her spine. This is a great visual representation of what it feels like to be overwhelmed by your demons and mental illness. When my anxiety would get extreme, I would physically take off running in fear, but there was nowhere to run. I used to compare my depression to a shadowy figure that was hunting me, like a physical presence that I could sometimes feel. When I felt it coming, my anxiety would then spike, especially during the night. To this day, I still sleep with lights on because complete darkness has become a long-time trigger for me. While mental illness or mental manifestations may not be in a real physical sense part of the real world, it is very much real to those who suffer from the illness. With the Babadook fully inside her, Amelia's behavior becomes even more aggressive. When Bugsy the dog begins to bark at her, sensing that something is very wrong, she rushes him and breaks his neck. Afterwards, she reaches into her own mouth to grab at her own tooth, pulling out the tooth that was paining her and tossing it aside. Loose teeth or a loose tooth is a common nightmare that a lot of people experience, leading many psychologists and other dream enthusiasts to speculate on possible symbolism behind the meaning of a loose tooth. I believe her lost tooth is symbolism for her loss that she has not dealt with. It has been a pain that has been bothering her from the start, only now she has finally pulled it out, representing how she is starting to begin her journey towards facing her fears. She turns her attention to Samuel next, trying to lure him out of his room, but Samuel refuses to let her in. She begins to act more and more erratic, cursing him and acting completely out of control, breaking down the door. She levitates towards him like the Babadook and unleashes a barrage of insults and threats to Samuel. He is able to get away using his tricks, weapons, and cleverness. He is able to evade her, but finds himself locked inside the house, essentially trapped. Mrs. Roach comes to check in on Amelia and tells Amelia how much she loves the two of them. Amelia goes to Samuel to apologize, telling him that they will spend the night at Mrs. Roach. She is able to get close to him. Samuel, seemingly letting his guard down, lets her approach, until she says something strange, telling Samuel that she wants him to meet his father. Samuel, on his guard, stabs her in the leg, and he is able to lead her into another trap that he has set in the basement. He then pushes her and knocks her out. He's able to restrain her and ties her up. Amelia wakes and begins to act animalistic. She is overcome with rage and grief. Samuel tries to plead with her, telling her she needs to get the Babadook out of her. Amelia, in her frantic movements and rage, is able to slip out of her restraints and grabs at his throat, choking him. She is seemingly about to fulfill the Mr. Babadook story. But Samuel reaches out and strokes Amelia's face affectionately, causing Amelia to come to her senses. She throws him aside and thrashes wildly, and proceeds to expel black blood-like liquid from her mouth. This scene is so visceral to me because when I was deep in my depression, it really did feel like something was wrong deep inside me that was poisoning me. I felt uncomfortable in my own skin and wanted to expel it. So the scene is pretty close to home for me. With the Babadook seemingly out of Amelia, she and Samuel try to leave the house. But Samuel tells her ominously that they cannot get rid of the Babadook. This is very tragic symbolically, because the Babadook is not something that you can defeat, and has seemingly latched on to Samuel. I believe this is meant to represent how trauma and mental illness can sometimes latch onto others, especially loved ones, and definitely children. Samuel is seemingly grabbed and dragged off by an invisible force, leading Amelia to give chase. In her bedroom, she confronts the Babadook face to face. At first it takes the form of her husband, and then forces her to experience the pain of losing him again, replaying the scenario of his death. This is very much part of how insidious and torturous the Babadook, and what I believe to be a representation of mental illness, can be, since it forces you to relive horrible events, making it almost impossible, or it makes it feel like it is impossible, to move on. Amelia falls to the ground in grief, but as the Babadook begins to hiss at her in the dark, Amelia stands back up. She faces the darkness and the void, and screams into it, telling the Babadook, quote, "You're nothing. This is my house. You are trespassing in my house." The Babadook shakes the whole house and stretches long, impossible limbs looming over Amelia. But she does not back down this time, and she does not run and hide. She continues, quote, "If you touch my son again, I will fucking kill you." The Babadook tries to suck Samuel away into the void, but Amelia holds on to him for dear life and roars a defiant cry back at the darkness. Amelia stands defiant, and the Babadook shrinks to a small size, collapsing to the floor. Amelia goes to investigate, and as she does, the Babadook seemingly flies away. In fright, it escapes to the basement and shuts itself in. Amelia and Samuel embrace, surviving the Babadook together. I absolutely love this powerful scene, as Amelia finds the strength within herself to fight for her own life and for Samuel. I especially love when she screams into the darkness, because this is what it can feel like sometimes when you try to continue on to fight. It sometimes really does feel like screaming and fighting in the void. I felt very isolated during my struggles, and often felt like I was against something so vast and endless that it seemed impossible to go on. Some time has passed after the incident with the Babadook. A happier Amelia and Samuel return to their normal everyday lives. Amelia invites Mrs. Roach over for Samuel's birthday. This will be the first birthday he's ever had on the actual day. Amelia and Samuel sit down again for a meeting with the officials from the Children's Service Department. Except this time, Samuel is his usual talkative self, blurting out whatever he's thinking, talking about how his father died on his birthday. This makes the officials a bit uncomfortable, but Amelia just lets Samuel be himself, no longer trying to stop him from talking and expressing himself. She herself even opens up about her husband and is calm and serene. This is Amelia opening herself up to others. She's also let Samuel talk about things, taking Mrs. Roach's advice. Sometime later, Amelia and Samuel are in the yard gardening. A rose is seen, and strangely, it is black. This is a symbol of Amelia's grief for her husband. It is a beautiful rose, but it is covered in the color of grief. But it is beautiful, and Amelia tends the rose carefully and lovingly. Amelia is finally choosing to grieve for her husband. She shapes her pain into something beautiful, cherishing her husband's memory instead of hiding it in the basement, and now she lets it bloom in the day. She also praises Samuel for shooting his darts, now nurturing his strange interests and not scolding him for playing and acting his own age. Strangely, Amelia and Samuel seem to be digging for worms, and they gather them in a big bowl. They then go to the basement door, but this time there are significantly more locks. Samuel asks her if he would ever see the Babadook again, to which Amelia tells him that maybe one day when he is older. I think this is beautiful visual representation of how Amelia is more guarded with her mental illness or her grief, setting up more boundaries like the locks on the doors. This also hints that Samuel will have to deal with the Babadook when he grows up. Samuel will have to deal with the trauma caused by the Babadook, and the grief and the loss of his father. Amelia tells him to go outside and play, and only to come back inside when she calls him. She continues into the basement cautiously. She sets the bowl down and offers the worms to the Babadook. It hisses at her and scares her from the dark. It tries to push her down, but Amelia manages to stay on her feet and soothes it like she would a scared beast. The Babadook retreats and accepts the bowl of worms. Once she had fed the Babadook, Amelia returns to the garden to eat sandwiches with Samuel. But before they eat, Samuel insists that he perform her a magic trick. He summons a white dove, and Amelia is absolutely delighted. They smile at each other and embrace, the two of them full of love and finally at peace. The movie ends. I love this ending so much because it depicts how grief and sorrow and mental illness does not disappear, but it is something that needs to be managed and nurtured. And not in a nurtured of, oh, let's make it worse, nurtured as intended to, like Amelia tends to her garden. The Babadook cannot be vanquished and will never disappear, but it is living with Amelia and Samuel in the basement, kept there to contain the damage like a wounded beast. But Samuel and Amelia will never be overpowered by it again. They feed the Babadook the worms and perform regular checkups. This is how I experience my own mental illness, where I need to make sure that I am not overwhelming myself or stressing myself out, and if I do need to take a break, then I will take my time so that I can make sure that I am not mentally compromised. Seeking professional help was also life-changing for me. It got me to a point where I was able to function day to day once again. But my mental illness, I believe, will be a lifelong struggle. But something that I truly believe that I will be able to manage. Similar to how Amelia and Samuel now manages to keep the Babadook at bay. The hopeful ending, I believe, is a strong message that the director Jennifer Kent is trying to convey. The Babadook might never be able to be vanquished, but it can be subdued. And recovery, while difficult, is very possible, but needs to be done with love and care. If you are experiencing your own struggles or feel like Mr. Babadook is haunting you, please reach out for help. There's no shame in asking for professional help or even just help from loved ones or friends. Always remember that you are not alone. I have some links to some mental health resources in my description box. Thank you for listening, And if you have enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, or comment. It really helps the channel grow, and I read every single comment, so it makes me feel really good that, again, I'm not just speaking into the void. So thanks again, and I hope you have a lovely day or night, wherever you are.